The night sky over Aetheris was alive with 1,000 shimmering stars, but none were as captivating as the glowing object that streaked across the heavens. Commander Elias Drake, a seasoned officer aboard the starship Eclipse, was used to the endless void, the cold silence of space, and the predictable motion of the stars. But tonight was different. As the strange object burned through the atmosphere, it lit up the planet below with a fierce, almost unnatural glow. It wasn't just a falling star, it was something far more mysterious, and it wasn't heading for any specific destination. Elias's eyes narrowed as he watched the object plummet, its course erratic and uncontrolled, as though it were a signal of something important, something urgent. His fingers danced over the control panel, his heart beating faster as he tried to make sense of what was happening. The distant moonlight reflected off the ship's sleek metal surface as he issued a command to intercept the unknown object. The ship's systems hummed to life as the Eclipse altered its course. Something told Elias that this wouldn't be just another routine mission. Then came the signal, a burst of static, crackling through the comm system like a distress call from the edge of the universe itself. "I am Princess Solara of the Vistari. We seek sanctuary." The message was fragmented, but the urgency in the voice on the other end was unmistakable. Elias leaned forward, heart racing. This wasn't just a random transmission. This was a plea for help. A mere flicker of hesitation passed through Elias's mind, but only for a moment. He knew the Vistari by reputation, an ancient and proud alien race, known for their beauty and elegance, but also for their history of seclusion. Their people had avoided contact with humanity for centuries. Their royal bloodline was something of myth in the outer colonies, their technologies unmatched by any species Elias had ever encountered. Yet here was one of them, a princess, stranded and in need of help. "Prepare a landing crew," Elias ordered, his voice calm despite the swirl of emotions inside him. He had seen combat, alien threats, and political intrigue, but he had never encountered anything quite like this. The Eclipse glided toward the surface of Aetheris, its massive engines purring as it descended. A thick layer of mist covered the ground, shrouding the colony's outskirts in an eerie, silent blanket. This wasn't a place that normally welcomed visitors, certainly not visitors like Princess Solara. The landing zone was an abandoned industrial complex at the edge of the colony's perimeter, surrounded by crumbling metal structures and derelict machinery. The air was thick with the scent of rust and decay. As the Eclipse touched down, Elias was the first to disembark, his boots crunching on the frost that clung to the abandoned concrete. The rest of his team followed, each of them equipped with standard issue gear, their expressions unreadable, but focused. Elias's eyes scanned the desolate landscape as his boots led him toward a faint glowing shape. The princess was barely visible, lying on the ground unconscious and partially covered in wreckage. Her royal armor was scorched, damaged by the turbulent re-entry. She was small, delicate, her blue skin almost translucent in the dim light, but Elias could see that she was alive, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Without a second thought, he rushed to her side, kneeling down to check her pulse. It was weak, but steady. Her silver hair shimmered in the dull light, framing her face like a halo, and Elias couldn't help but stare. Her beauty was like nothing he had ever seen before. It wasn't just her physical appearance, though. There was an aura about her, something otherworldly that tugged at his very soul. "Princess," Elias murmured, his voice soft as he gently touched her arm, trying to rouse her. "Princess, wake up." For a moment, nothing happened, but then her eyelids fluttered open and a weak, confused gaze met his. Her eyes were dark, almost black, filled with fear and desperation. When she spoke, her voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. "Please," she gasped. "Help me." Elias didn't hesitate. He lifted her gently into his arms, cradling her fragile form against his chest. Despite her alien biology, despite the enormous differences between them, there was a sense of connection that he couldn't explain. The warmth of her skin against his seemed to sear through him, and for a brief moment he forgot about everything else. The cold, the dangers, the mission. All that mattered was her. "I've got you," he whispered, a promise more than an assurance. He wasn't sure what would come next, but in that moment he knew that he couldn't leave her. She was a princess from a far-off world, but right now, she was just a woman in need of help, and he was the one who could give it to her. As he made his way back to the ship, carrying her through the mist, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. The universe had just become a far more complicated place, and he couldn't predict what would come next. But one thing was certain: he was now responsible for the fate of a princess, an alien from a distant world, and the very thought of that sent an unfamiliar thrill through his veins. When he finally reached the Eclipse, he handed her off to the medical team, who immediately began to work on her injuries. Elias stood at the door of the medbay for a moment, watching them carefully. This was just the beginning, he realized. He had opened the door to something far greater than a simple rescue mission. He had opened the door to a future he could never have imagined. And whether he was ready or not, that future would soon unfold in ways that would change him forever. Elias stood just outside the medbay, his boots clicking softly against the cold metal floor of the Eclipse. His hands were clasped behind his back, his mind racing with 1,000 questions he couldn't begin to answer. It had only been hours since the glowing object had plummeted from the sky, and in those few short hours, his life had already taken a turn he hadn't anticipated. He couldn't stop thinking about the princess, Solara, he reminded himself. That name echoed in his mind, a word that now seemed to carry the weight of the universe. Inside the medbay, the air was filled with the sound of medical instruments, beeping, and the soft murmur of the crew tending to Solara's injuries. Elias had seen his fair share of trauma, but nothing like this. The princess was unlike any being he had ever encountered. Her alien beauty had captivated him, yes, but it was the vulnerability in her eyes, the fear and the deep sadness that had drawn him in. He couldn't shake the feeling that something much bigger was at play here. He had only just met her, yet he already felt a responsibility to protect her. He paced in the narrow hallway outside, his mind wandering back to the moment he first held her in his arms. It had been a simple act of rescue, but something in the way her fragile form had fit against his chest, so small and delicate, stirred something inside him. He wasn't sure if it was empathy or something deeper, something more primal. He'd told her he'd keep her safe, but that promise now seemed impossibly heavy. The door to the medbay opened suddenly, and Elias was jolted from his thoughts. Dr. Hanley, the ship's lead medical officer, stepped out, his face creased with concern. His gaze met Elias's, and for a moment they just stood there in silence. "How is she?" Elias asked, his voice low, almost hesitant. Dr. Hanley rubbed a hand over his face, a tired sigh escaping his lips. "She's stable for now," he said. "But we're still running tests. Her injuries are severe. Internal bruising, some kind of energy burns, and the oddest thing, her biology doesn't quite match anything we've encountered before. It's almost like her body's resistance to healing is different." Elias frowned. "Different how?" "Her physiology is not what we expected for an alien species," Dr. Hanley continued. "It's fragile, yet resilient. I can't explain it fully yet, but there's something about her biology that's unlike anything we've studied. The energy burns are healing slower than they should, but her skin's already beginning to regenerate. It's as if she's healing, at a rate we can't quite grasp." Elias's brow furrowed in confusion. He wasn't a doctor, but he'd seen his fair share of injuries in his time. He understood recovery rates, human limits, and alien biology to an extent. But this, it didn't make sense. "So you think she'll make it?" "She's strong," Hanley said with a nod. "More so than her body suggests. She has the will to survive. But there's one more thing, Elias." He hesitated for a moment, glancing back toward the medbay. "When I examined her more closely, her body, there's a certain compatibility with human biology. It's strange. It's almost as though..." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Go on." I don't know how to explain it yet, but there's an energy exchange. Her body seems to react when exposed to human contact. It's almost like her energy field aligns with yours in some way. It's subtle but noticeable. Elias's heart skipped a beat. Are you saying we— No, Hanley interrupted, shaking his head. I'm not saying anything yet, but I'd recommend keeping an eye on it. Just be careful. Elias was about to respond when a soft voice interrupted him. Captain Drake? He turned to see Solara standing in the doorway to the medbay, a blanket draped around her shoulders. Her hair, still silver and glimmering in the low light, cascaded around her face like a curtain of moonlight. Despite her fragile appearance, there was a fierce determination in her eyes. She wasn't weak. Far from it. Princess, Elias said, stepping forward. He wasn't sure if he should offer to help her, but the instinct to protect her was overwhelming. You should be resting. You've been through a lot. She gave him a soft smile, though it was tinged with sadness. I know, but I've been in worse situations before. Her voice was smooth, yet there was a sorrow beneath it that Elias couldn't ignore. I need to speak with you, Commander. It's important. Elias's gaze flicked over to Dr. Hanley, who gave him a subtle nod. I'll be right outside if you need me, the doctor said, stepping back into the hallway, leaving them alone. Solara stepped into the room, her movement slow but steady. She didn't look weak. In fact, there was a quiet strength in the way she carried herself, a regal composure despite the circumstances. Her eyes never left Elias as she walked closer. I'm not sure what brought you to this world, Princess, Elias said, trying to break the silence, but I've made a promise to protect you. You'll have sanctuary here, at least for as long as you need. She stopped in front of him, her gaze searching his face. I never asked for sanctuary, she said softly, her voice carrying a weight of unspoken truths. I came here because I had no choice. The Vistari are dying. My people are scattered, our cities are burning, and our enemies are closing in. But that's not why I came to you, Commander. I came because I needed someone who could understand what it means to fight, to protect those you love. Someone who could see beyond my title. Elias's breath caught in his throat. You're not alone anymore, Princess. Her gaze softened, and for the first time Elias saw the vulnerability beneath the surface. It wasn't just a plea for help. It was a call for connection. I know, she said quietly, but I've always been alone. Even in my own kingdom, my family and they never understood, not the way you do. Elias didn't know what to say. He wasn't a prince, and he didn't know what it was like to carry the weight of an entire species on his shoulders. But in that moment, he understood something important. The princess wasn't just a symbol of royalty or power. She was a woman, a person who had carried the burden of her people for too long. She needed more than sanctuary. She needed understanding, compassion, and maybe, just maybe, something more than either of them had anticipated. Elias stepped closer to her, his voice softer now. You're not alone anymore. I don't know what comes next, but we'll face it together. Solara's eyes filled with something Elias couldn't quite read. Relief, perhaps, or something deeper, something that both terrified and exhilarated him. She didn't speak for a long moment, but when she finally did, her voice was steady, full of quiet strength. Thank you, Commander, for everything, and for what you'll do next. As she looked up at him, there was a flicker of something between them. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the beginning of something new, something powerful. And neither of them could deny that the pull was there, undeniable, as if the universe itself had brought them together for a reason. Neither of them knew it yet, but this was the first step into a new kind of bond, something that would change everything. And it started with a promise, one that both of them would keep, no matter the cost. Elias stood at the edge of the eclipse, staring out into the abyss of space. The stars seemed distant, cold, and indifferent to the chaos unfolding on the ship. Yet for the first time in his career, He felt like he had a stake in something far greater than just the mission. Princess Solara's presence had become a constant weight on his mind, a puzzle that he couldn't stop trying to solve. He had kept his promise to protect her. But now, with each passing day, Elias was beginning to realize that he wasn't just protecting her from the dangers of her broken world. He was protecting her from the dangers of his world as well. The world where the heart, once given, was something he hadn't expected to be drawn to. Elias had always been a soldier, pragmatic and steady, never one to give in to the messy, unpredictable pull of emotions. Yet every time he looked into Solara's eyes, something inside him stirred. It was more than duty. It was something much harder to ignore. The door to the observation deck slid open behind him. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Her soft footsteps, the delicate sound of her presence, were enough. Solara had a way of moving that was both graceful and deliberate, as though each step she took mattered. "Commander," she said, her voice drawing him out of his thoughts. "Princess," Elias replied without turning around. "How are you feeling today?" Solara stepped closer, her figure now casting a soft shadow in the low light. She had been recovering steadily, though Elias could see that the weariness never fully left her eyes. She was strong, yes, but the weight of her past was something that even her advanced alien physiology couldn't completely shield her from. Her royal attire, now cleaned and mended, still bore the marks of the crash and the harsh journey she had endured. "I'm healing," she said quietly, her gaze tracing the stars beyond the thick glass. "But healing isn't the same as being whole." Elias turned to face her, a slight frown pulling at his features. "You're not alone anymore, Solara. You've got people here who'll help." She met his gaze then, her dark eyes softening just a fraction. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I wasn't meant to be here. I wasn't meant to be saved. The Vistari, my people, have been avoiding humanity for so long for a reason." "Then why are you here?" Elias asked, his voice quiet but filled with curiosity. Solara hesitated, her fingers curling around the railing in front of her. "We were wrong, Commander. We thought we could remain isolated forever, untouched by the galaxy around us. We thought we were different. But the truth is, I'm the last of my kind. My world is burning and all I have left are fragments of what we once were. I thought if I found sanctuary I could heal. But now," she trailed off, her voice tinged with something like sorrow. Elias stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "Solara, She held up her hand, a delicate gesture that stilled his words. "No, don't misunderstand. I'm not asking for pity. I've lived my entire life with the knowledge that I was never meant for peace. I was always meant to carry the weight of a dying world." Her words were like shards of glass, piercing through him. Elias had heard stories of lost civilizations, of people who had vanished without a trace, but this was different. This was real, and it was happening right in front of him. "I didn't ask for you to carry this burden, Solara," Elias said, his voice suddenly rough. "But you're not carrying it alone anymore. You're part of this crew, part of my world, and I won't let you bear it all by yourself." She studied him for a long moment, her gaze searching his face as if trying to read him, to see if he truly meant what he was saying. "Do you know what it's like?" she said softly. "To be the last of your kind? To have your entire existence defined by a prophecy, by an idea of what you're supposed to be, not who you really are?" Elias shook his head, unsure of how to answer. He couldn't imagine it, couldn't fathom the weight of that kind of isolation. "No," he said, quietly, "I don't." Solara's lips parted as if she were about to speak, but then just as quickly she shut them. She turned back to the stars, her long silver hair flowing in a soft cascade behind her. There was something in her posture now, a subtle shift that hinted at the vulnerability she had long kept hidden from everyone, including herself. "I've spent my life pretending I didn't care," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Pretending I was stronger than I was, I've spent my entire existence running from the truth, hiding from the part of me that just wants to belong, to be with someone who can see me for who I am, not for what I represent. Elias didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, so close that he could feel the warmth radiating off her body. He didn't touch her, not yet, but he wanted to. He could sense the weight of her words, the way she struggled to open herself up to him, and he couldn't help but feel drawn to her in a way that made his chest tighten. "You've already shown me that you're more than just a princess," Elias said softly. "You're a person. You're someone who's been through hell and back and still stands. I see you, Solara. All of you." Her eyes flicked to him, and for the first time she didn't look away. There was no trace of the guarded, untouchable princess in her eyes now. Instead, there was a softness, a quiet longing that Elias couldn't ignore. "I've never wanted anyone to see me," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "But you've made me feel like maybe I could let someone in." Elias's breath caught in his throat. He had expected her to pull away, to retreat, into the fortress she had built around herself. But instead she was standing there, vulnerable and open. Something shifted between them then, something he couldn't name. Before he knew it, his hand reached out, brushing against hers. It was a simple gesture, almost too small to be significant, but in that moment, it felt like the entire galaxy had paused. He could feel her pulse racing beneath her skin, a silent acknowledgement of the connection they were beginning to share. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The ship's hum was the only sound filling the air between them. Finally, Solara spoke again, her voice barely audible. "I don't know what's going to happen next, Elias," she said. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do here. But with you, maybe I can find a reason to keep going, to stay." Elias's heart raced in his chest as he looked at her, his pulse thrumming with a mixture of uncertainty and something deeper, something undeniable. He didn't know what the future held, and he certainly didn't know how a soldier like him could fit into the life of a princess, let alone an alien royalty. But in this moment, with her standing there, offering him a part of herself he hadn't expected, Elias felt something stir in him that went beyond logic, beyond reason. "Stay," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You don't have to go anywhere, Solara. Not alone." For the first time since their paths had crossed, Solara smiled. It wasn't a smile of politeness or duty. It was genuine, warm, and real. And in that moment, Elias realized that they weren't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting for something far more powerful, the chance to truly be seen, to truly belong together. And that was the beginning of something neither of them had ever expected. Days passed aboard the Eclipse as the crew continued their work. In the cold depths of space, their mission now more complex and personal than ever. For Commander Elias Drake, the vastness of the galaxy seemed smaller with each passing day, his thoughts drifting more and more often to Princess Solara. The initial shock of their first encounter had worn off, but the tension between them had only deepened. There was an unspoken bond now, one that neither of them could ignore. It was more than attraction. It was something that both terrified and excited Elias in equal measure. As much as he tried to focus on his duties, his mind kept returning to her. Solara, despite her grace and beauty, was a woman burdened with the weight of her people's destruction. She carried it like a heavy cloak, one she couldn't remove even as she tried to open herself to him. But every time she spoke of her past, the pain in her voice was undeniable. The Vistari had suffered losses that most species couldn't comprehend, and she, as the last of her royal bloodline, was the symbol of everything they had lost. Elias knew that no matter how much he tried to protect her from the galaxy's cruelty, he couldn't erase that history. He had tried to remain distant, to maintain the professional boundary between them. But the more he spent time with Solara, the harder it became to keep his feelings in check. They had shared quiet moments aboard the ship, talking for hours about their respective cultures, their lives before the war, and what had brought them both to this point. It was during one of those long conversations that Solara had confessed something that made Elias's heart ache in ways he didn't expect. "I don't remember what it was like to feel safe," she had said one evening, her voice soft, almost fragile. "The Vistari have always been a peaceful race, but we were always surrounded by enemies. There was never any time for peace. I've spent my life waiting for the next attack, the next war. And now I don't know what to do with the quiet." The words had stuck with him. He understood, perhaps better than she realized, what it was like to carry the weight of an entire species' fate on your shoulders. But he couldn't imagine the depths of isolation she must have felt. Solara wasn't just a princess. She wasn't just royalty. She was a survivor, a person who had borne the entire history of her people's struggles alone. No one could truly understand that unless they had walked in her shoes. It was in the following days that Elias began to notice something else. Something that filled him with both wonder and a growing sense of intrigue. As they spent more time together, he began to see how her body reacted to his presence. It wasn't obvious at first, but when they were in close proximity, Elias could feel a subtle, almost electric pull between them. Their touch, however brief, left a lingering warmth in the air. When Solara brushed past him in the corridors, he would catch the faintest hint of her scent, like a delicate flower mixed with the coolness of the stars. It was intoxicating, and despite himself, Elias found himself wanting more. The way her body responded to his proximity was unlike anything he had ever experienced. There were moments when he would extend his hand, offering assistance or support, and without thinking she would take it, her fingers brushing his. Each time the sensation sent a jolt of electricity through him, and he would catch a flicker of something in her eyes. A fleeting moment of vulnerability, followed by the same distant look she always wore. It was strange, this connection between them. She wasn't human. Their biology was so different. But every time they touched, every time they were near each other, there was an undeniable spark that felt right. It wasn't just a physical response. It was deeper, something emotional, something intimate that neither of them could deny. One evening, after an exhausting day of repairs and debriefings, Elias found himself alone in the crew quarters. His mind was racing, his body craving the familiar comfort of solitude. But just as he was about to rest, the soft chime of the door rang out. He turned to see Solara standing in the doorway, her figure framed by the dim light of the hallway. She had changed into a simple tunic, her silver hair pulled back into a loose braid. She looked every bit the regal princess, but there was a softness in her eyes now that hadn't been there before. "I didn't mean to disturb you," she said, her voice gentle, hesitant. Elias smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "You're not disturbing me, princess. Come in." She stepped inside, her presence filling the room in a way that made the air feel suddenly heavier. The quiet between them was thick with unspoken words, and Elias could feel the tension building. He wasn't sure what it was that had brought her here, but he could sense that she needed something, perhaps more than she even realized. "I've been thinking," Solara began, her voice almost a whisper, "about what you said before, about me not being alone. I know you mean well, Elias, but I don't know if I can let anyone in. My life, my people's history, it's not something anyone should carry with them, not even you." Elias's chest tightened. He knew that pain. He knew what it was like to carry the weight of something that wasn't his fault, something that was so much bigger than himself. "You don't have to carry it alone, Solara," he said, his voice steady but filled with a depth of feeling that surprised him. "I'm here, and I'll stay here. You're not just a princess to me. You're a person, and you deserve more than this." Her eyes softened, the slightest hint of relief crossing her features. "I want to believe that. I do. But what if I can't? What if I'm not worthy of that kind of love? I've spent so many years living a life of responsibility, of duty, of trying to hold everything together. I'm afraid that I don't know how to live for myself anymore." Elias took a step toward her, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. He reached out, gently placing his hand on hers. The contact was electric, a spark of warmth that seemed to light something inside him. "You don't have to do anything alone, Solara," he said softly, his voice full of conviction. "And you don't have to be worthy of anything. You just have to be who you are." For the first time since their fateful meeting, Solara didn't pull away. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with something that felt almost like wonder, as if she were seeing him for the first time. And in that moment, Elias realized something. He wasn't just there to protect her, to keep her safe. He was there to help her find herself again, to help her heal from the weight of the past and learn how to live again. Without a word, Solara leaned in closer, her breath warm against his skin. There was no hesitation, no barriers between them anymore. Just two people standing together in the middle of a galaxy that had always been too big and too cold to care. But right here, in this moment, it felt like nothing else mattered. As their lips met, a wave of heat flooded through Elias's chest, the connection between them stronger than he could ever have imagined. It wasn't just physical, though, that was undeniable. It was something deeper, something primal, and yet tender. Something that neither of them had expected, but both of them needed. The kiss deepened, slow and gentle at first, as if they were both still unsure, still learning how to navigate the new world they had found together. But in that moment, they both knew one thing for certain: they were no longer alone. For the first time, both Solara and Elias felt the weight of the universe lift, replaced by something far more powerful. The beginning of a new kind of connection. A connection that was forged not just through survival, but through the promise of something more, something lasting. And for once, neither of them feared what might come next. They were ready to face it together. The eclipse drifted silently through the dark expanse of space, the hum of its engines a constant presence that seemed almost reassuring to those aboard. Commander Elias Drake had never felt more torn in his life. The once predictable, steady rhythm of his duties now felt like a distant echo in the wake of the newfound bond between him and Princess Solara. Each passing day brought them closer, not just in proximity but in understanding. An understanding that was both exhilarating and terrifying. The kiss they had shared on the observation deck had been a turning point, one neither of them had expected. It wasn't an impulsive act or one born out of fleeting attraction. It was a revelation, a moment of clarity in a world that had always been murky with uncertainty. Elias could no longer deny what he felt for Solara. There was no turning back. But as the days wore on, the reality of their situation weighed heavily on him. They were from two vastly different worlds, and the complexities of their relationship, of their very beings, seemed insurmountable. Yet as they spent more time together, Elias couldn't help but notice the subtle changes in Solara. The princess, who had once seemed so distant, so closed off, was slowly allowing herself to be vulnerable. The walls she had built around her heart had started to crumble, though only a little. Each day, Elias saw more of the woman beneath the royal facade, someone who had endured unimaginable loss, someone who had known only survival. She was still a princess in the eyes of the galaxy, but with him she was simply Solara, a woman, learning to trust again. The ship's crew had noticed the change too. The crew that had once viewed the princess with a sense of awe and wariness now seemed to be more comfortable around her. Conversations were less formal, less guarded. They had begun to see her not just as a symbol of a fallen empire, but as a person, a survivor. They had started to accept her just as Elias had, not because of her title or her heritage, but because of who she truly was. One evening, after a long day of repairs and tactical meetings, Elias found himself alone in the ship's galley. The rest of the crew had scattered to their stations, and he had taken the time to sit down for a moment of quiet. His thoughts, as always, wandered to Solara. He couldn't help it. She was always in his mind now, in the quiet moments when he was supposed to be focusing on the mission, on his duties. And yet, no matter how much he tried to push the thoughts away, they returned with a force he couldn't deny. He was still pondering those thoughts when the soft sound of footsteps approached from behind. Elias didn't need to look up to know who it was. He felt her presence before he heard her. "Elias?" Solara's voice was soft, tentative, but there was a certain steadiness in it that made his chest tighten. He turned, offering her a warm smile. "Princess," he said, his voice low but filled with affection. "I didn't expect to see you here. Everything all right?" Solara nodded, but her gaze was distant, her eyes focused on something far away. "I was just thinking," she said, her voice quieter now, as though she were unsure of how much to share. "About us." Elias raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Us?" She stepped closer, her delicate frame almost ethereal in the dim light of the galley. "Yes, about what we've become to each other. It's strange," she admitted. "I've never been this close to anyone before. Not like this." He stood up, his chair scraping softly against the floor as he moved toward her. "I know what you mean," he said quietly. "I didn't expect any of this either. You've changed everything for me, Solara." She met his gaze then, her dark eyes searching his face as if looking for something. "And what about the future?" she asked, her voice almost fragile. "What do we do when we're no longer on this ship? When the eclipse reaches the next?" "Stop? What happens then?" The question caught Elias off guard. He had thought about it, of course. He had imagined what the future might hold, what it would look like for him, for her. But those thoughts had always been buried beneath the weight of the present. He hadn't allowed himself to truly think ahead. Not yet. "I don't know," Elias admitted, his voice low, his words carrying more weight than he'd intended. "I guess I've been so focused on getting through today, on keeping us both safe, that I haven't thought about the next step. But we'll figure it out, Solara. Together. I won't leave you." Solara took a deep breath, her hand trembling ever so slightly as she reached out to touch his arm. "I don't want you to leave me either," she whispered, her voice raw, with emotion. "But I need to know if I can trust this, if I can trust you." Elias reached up, gently cupping her face in his hand. The simple touch was enough to still her, to calm the whirlwind of emotions that he could see in her eyes. "You can trust me," he said softly, his voice full of conviction. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm here for you, Solara. Whatever comes next." Her eyes softened, and for a brief moment she let herself lean into his touch, allowing herself to feel the warmth of his reassurance. She closed her eyes, letting the moment settle in, and for the first time in a long while she allowed herself to simply be. No walls, no expectations, just two people standing together in the quiet of space. "You don't have to carry the weight of your people's legacy alone," Elias continued, his voice filled with quiet tenderness. "I'll help you carry it, if you'll let me. But we need to face it together, and whatever the future holds, we'll take it one step at a time." Solara's lips parted as if she were about to say something, but then she stopped, her gaze flicking to the floor, her thoughts clearly weighing heavily on her. "And if I'm not ready?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elias's heart ached at the vulnerability in her voice. He stepped closer, taking her hand in his. "Then we wait," he said simply. "We wait until you're ready. I'm not rushing you, Solara. We've both been through so much. We have all the time we need." The silence between them stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a quiet understanding, a moment where words weren't necessary. Solara looked up at him, her expression softening, and she squeezed his hand. A small gesture that meant everything. "I never thought I'd find someone who understood," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "But with you, Elias, I feel like I'm not just a princess anymore, I'm me. And for the first time, I don't feel like I'm carrying the weight of an empire on my shoulders. I feel like I can breathe." Elias smiled, a warmth spreading through him at her words. "You deserve to breathe, Solara, and you don't have to do it alone." And as they stood there together, their hands clasped, a quiet promise passed between them. They didn't know what the future held, didn't know what paths they would walk, but one thing was certain: they would walk them together. Whatever came next, whether it was war or peace, survival or something more, they would face it side by side. They weren't just two people from different worlds anymore. They were something more. They were a team, united by a bond that had formed in the unlikeliest of places. And in the deep, vast unknown of space, that was enough for now. The Eclipse drifted toward its final destination, the hum of its engines, a constant reminder of the journey that had brought them here. Elias stood on the observation deck, staring out into the vast expanse of stars. His thoughts were no longer clouded by uncertainty. The future, though still unknown, no longer filled him with fear. He had found something he hadn't expected, something he hadn't even realized he was searching for, a bond with Solara that had changed everything. He remembered the first time they had met, the falling star, the distress signal, and how, at the time, he had seen only a princess, a symbol of a lost people. But now, as he looked back on everything they had shared, he knew that Solara was not just the last of her kind. She was someone who had carried the weight of the universe alone, and in him, she had found someone who would share that burden. Solara's presence had transformed not just the Eclipse but his entire world. In her, Elias had discovered a strength he had never imagined. She was no longer just a fragile princess, but a woman who had fought and survived, who had faced impossible odds and still had the courage to open her heart. And as they both learned to navigate their new bond, Elias realized that what they had wasn't just about survival. It was about finding solace in each other's arms, about rebuilding a future in the ashes of their broken pasts. Their relationship had never been easy. There were moments of doubt, times when Solara's fears and insecurities surfaced, and Elias had been forced to confront his own uncertainty. But they had weathered those storms together. They had learned to communicate, to trust, and to be vulnerable in ways they never thought possible. The war that had once seemed inevitable was now a distant memory. With each passing day, the Eclipse moved farther away from the chaos they had left behind, toward a new frontier, one they would build together. There would be challenges ahead, of course. Solara's people were scattered across the galaxy, their future uncertain. But now, for the first time in a long time, they had hope. They had each other. As the Eclipse prepared to dock at the next human settlement, a new chapter began for both Elias and Solara. They stood side by side on the deck, looking out at the distant horizon. Elias squeezed her hand, feeling the warmth of her skin beneath his fingertips, the strength in her grip, a strength that matched his own. "I never thought I would find someone like you," Solara said quietly, her voice full of emotion. "Not in a million years." Elias smiled softly, brushing a strand of her silver hair behind her ear. "I never thought I'd find someone like you either," he said. "But I'm glad I did." She looked up at him, her dark eyes filled with gratitude and something deeper, a connection that was beyond words. "And now?" she asked, her voice a little uncertain, but there was a spark in her eyes that made Elias's heart beat faster. "Now we take it one day at a time," Elias replied, his voice steady. "We build the future together. No more running, no more hiding, just us." The stars beyond the viewport seemed to shine a little brighter in that moment, as though the universe itself was offering its approval. Solara leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder, and for the first time in a long while, both of them allowed themselves to simply be present in the moment. The weight of the past had been heavy, but now together they could look forward with hope. They didn't have all the answers. They didn't know exactly what the future would bring. But they knew this: they were no longer alone, and that was all that mattered. The bond they had forged, born from survival and trust, was strong enough to carry them through whatever came next. And as the Eclipse sailed toward a new world, Elias and Solara stood together, facing the unknown side by side, ready for whatever adventures awaited them. The galaxy was vast, but they were no longer lost in it. Together they were home.